Welcome, David Axelrod, to Fast Politics.
Thanks.
I wonder if we could start by talking about Spencer Cox's really, I thought, excellent speech.
Yes.
So they caught the Charlie, the
Yes, they've
accused
arrested a suspect in
suspect.
the
Yes, they've
yeah.
arrested a suspect, and Governor Cox, the governor of Utah, was making a speech.
Governor Cox, after delivering all the details of the arrest about this young man who was arrested, gave just an incredibly heartfelt, passionate homily about what this moment in history is. He said, I thought very movingly, that he had prayed that this wasn't going to be a Utahn who was involved in this, that maybe because he didn't think of Utah as a place where people acted in anger like that, but it turned out it was. But he was, his plea basically was to the better angels of our nature and to recognize that uh, we are doomed if we are trapped in an ever increasing spiral of hate and division and violence. It was so important that he said it because there were people, there were voices out there, Steve Bannon and others, who were saying, this is war, Alex Jones. It's so the inference being, go pick up your
Yeah,
guns.
and
And
that we do not
we don't
want.
need that on the left or the right.
The right.
So that was why that was so important.
And I thought what was really also important about this was that he talked about the 1960s, which
Yes.
are we are the United States of amnesia, and so the 1960s are not that long ago.
Well, if
and
I
we
if I forget it, it's less about amnesia and more about senility. Um,
not
but
true.
I was a kid in the 60s. I lived that. Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy, when I was
Yeah.
a little boy. These were heroes of my youth. And I can tell you that at that time, and remember, we had National Guardsmen on Kent State campus in Ohio in 1970 who killed 4 unarmed student protesters. It felt as if things were coming apart. It felt like that. And remember, we were involved in a war then in which 500,000 Americans were engaged, 50,000 lost their lives. So it really did feel that way. Were able to right the ship then, but we didn't have social media then, which I think the role that social media has played in in the fraying of our social fabric, I think can't be underestimated. It was presented to us as a tool to create community, but what it really is a tool to divide the community into deeply divided camps. Because the thing, and this, you're a student of all this, Molly, the thing that keeps people online is their great inspiration is hate and division and fear and anger and resentment and conspiracy theories. And the more you evidence responsiveness to that, the deeper you get shoved into a silo, and then where we are now. Politics has come to reflect that same culture, and we're going to have to push back with tremendous force to stop the momentum of the divisiveness and the hate and the violence.
Yeah. I wonder if we could talk for a minute about kind of where Democrats are right now in the
Mhm.
wilderness
Yes.
and what that looks like. I have been, I was just interviewed by someone, and he was like, say something that you think is positive. And I was like, I could think of like 15 things. Like, I think like Pritzker has been incredible and has broken through. Newsom has cracked the internet. Even if you don't agree with him or ideologically like him, my man has out Trump Trump on Twitter. Like, Run for Something is being swamped with thousands upon thousands of people who want to run for office. Robert Garcia got the birthday book subpoenaed from the Epstein estate. And I just have seen a lot of really impressive movement from Democrats over the last couple weeks. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think that there has been a stouter resistance to Trump, but I would just say to you, not one thing that you said just now actually speaks to the day-to-day lives of people. And one of the problems that I think that there are things that Trump is doing that warrant that resistance. I think as a tactical matter, you can get a lot of clicks and raise a lot of money by trying to match him troll for troll. But ultimately, there are two things that are required for Democrats to succeed. One is to be steadfast in standing up for principles. Yes, that's extraordinarily important. The other is to ask the question, how do we get here? How do we
Right.
get here? And why do so many people, how did so many working people in this country come to view the Democratic Party, the self-styled party of working people, as a party of elites, of failed institutions, and a status quo that is rigged against them? How did that happen? And so, and I think it's pretty obvious that the system hasn't really worked for large numbers of people. And the Democratic Party ought to be in the forefront of that fight. Donald Trump's not the answer. Donald Trump is a symptom of alienation, but he's not the answer. I mean, the only American family who he's making more prosperous is his own and perhaps some of his friends, not the people who elected him. But the Democratic Party has to be an authentic alternative. And the answer can't be, we're going to restore everything Donald Trump has destroyed. There's a lot that Donald Trump has destroyed that should be resurrected. There are values that he's trampled that are fundamental to who we are as a country. But it's also true that I was in Washington for a couple of years. I served in the White House. I got a bird's eye view of it. There are a lot of things that didn't make sense. There are a lot of ways in which we run the government that reflects the 20th century and not the 21st century, and where it's not an agile, responsive place. There is way too much influence of big money,
Right.
and it's just gotten worse with Trump. So the question is, for Democrats to succeed, they have to be stout in resistance to the trespasses of Trump, but they also have to project a vision of how you're actually going to build something that is responsive to the day-to-day problems of people, that is resistant to the influence of big money. And until the party is speaking to that in a way that is convincing and compelling and authentic, it's still going to be a struggle.
You want my hottest take? I'm gonna push back.
Yeah, no,
Even
I'm
though
not
what you're
surprised.
saying is not necessarily controversial, I'm gonna say I don't think that any of that matters if Democrats aren't willing to sell. And like, for example, if we look at Biden world, and there's certainly more than a lot of room to criticize Biden world, but legislatively, they were able to transfer, I mean, things like the child tax credit,
Mhm,
they were able to transfer wealth from the rich to the poor
mhm.
in a way that, in my lifetime, there were a number of legislative wins, but their staunch refusal to sell nothing ever to anyone meant that, by year 3, when they were like, "Why is no one covering us?" It didn't matter. People didn't believe it. So I just wonder, if I think you're absolutely right, big money, number 1 biggest problem, Citizens United, I mean, everyone had, look at TikTok, they were gonna get banned, and then they got lobbyists, and now they're not. But I just wonder how much of this is a legislative problem, which is a real problem, and how much of this is like an
No, I think
inability.
there's a communications problem, but I think it's more than what you suggest. And look, I applaud a lot of what they did. I disagreed with some of the things that they did, and there's no doubt that they were piss poor salesmen, and Biden was a piss poor salesman. But you know what? You can't jawbone people, Molly, into thinking
Right,
that their lives are what their lives aren't.
right,
And
true.
so, the fact is that these things were helpful, and they should have been pitched in the context of the larger struggle. The problem that as the Democratic Party has become more of a metropolitan, college-educated party. It's still the party of working people, but it approaches working people more like missionaries and
Right,
anthropologists, and we show up and
right,
we say, "We're
right.
here to help you become more like us, and we know what
Yes,
you need, and we're
yeah,
fighting for what you need." We don't show up with respect. We don't ask what is it that you need? What is going on? What how do
Right.
we don't do that. And in the pandemic, we go out on our balcony and we bang our pots and hail the essential workers. And as soon as the
Right.
pandemic's over, they become invisible again.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be a genuine connection to the people who Democrats purport to represent. And so there's no doubt that there was a failure to sell. And in a way, Biden did a little bit of what Trump has done in that there was so much talk about, we haven't seen anything like this since Roosevelt
Right.
and it was
Right.
about his accomplishment, not about the task at hand.
Yeah.
And I think that was a communications problem. And look, one of the insidious things about Donald Trump is that whatever else he is or isn't, and we can have robust debates about it, I guess. But one thing is undebatable is he is the greatest salesman.
Greatest.
Maybe Roosevelt was up there, but he is the
It is the
greatest
greatest
salesman.
salesman. Yeah.
He is the P.T. Barnum of
Yeah.
American in politics, and I think he's gonna run into a problem as well, because now he's doing what Biden did, and he's telling people, "Hey, the economy's never been better."
Right.
To
No.
forget about what you see at the cash register, forget about what you see in your
Yeah.
rent check, forget about your health bill, which is
Yeah.
about to shoot up.
20%.
Yeah, forget about
20%.
all
Yeah.
that stuff. You're doing great. I think that's an opportunity for Democrats, and I think that's where the focus should be. The question is who gets your lives and who's gonna fight for that. And by the way, yes, I think that these side trips, I mean, I do think like, it was insane to spend 3 years before you did something serious about the border. Insane.
Right.
And, it was wrong not to be much more active in trying to reopen schools. It was there are things that are I have great solicitude for vulnerable populations, but Democrats allowed themselves to be portrayed as caring more about vulnerable populations than understanding the vulnerabilities
Bloody.
of large numbers of Americans. So I think that the party itself has work to do, and it's not just enough to be clever in response to Trump or to get a lot of clicks or raise a lot of small donations. It's deeper and more intense for the party to become the party it needs to be.
Yeah, maybe. I agree that you can't run people who feel elitist. I agree that, but I just wonder, like, so my next
Not just
question is,
feel elitist, but are
are
elitist.
elitist? But so let's talk about like a Graham Plattner from
Mhm,
Maine, who's an
mhm.
oyster shucker and is the harbor master of his small town. I mean, is that like there is no one in Maine who thinks Graham Plattner is an elitist, right? He did like 4 tours of duty. He's got like as egalitarian a story
So you
as you.
think that's appealing?
Well, I'm asking you, is that what you're
Well,
talking
I
about?
mean, I think it may be. I think it may be. I'm not sure. I know that the folks in Washington have decided that it isn't, and that they want the governor to run, who's a very popular politician there, but who's 77 years
Wait,
old.
fact check. Jesse Cannon says he is an oyster farmer and not a shucker. I assume that if he's farming the oysters, eventually, if he's eating them, he is shucking them. But yes.
Well, maybe someone else is shucking them and he's farming them.
And then he would be an elitist. But I mean, is that the answer to that question?
I think the answer is to have I think that I believe very much that the answers bubble up from the bottom and not the top. There are people in Congress, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez is a good
Mhm.
example, who's won in a Trump district
Mhm.
twice. And Marie is someone who authentically speaks for her community and she's not Washington's representative to her community. She's her community's representative to Washington. And
Mhm.
I think more candidates like her who are indigenous and homegrown and really speak for the community are going to help the Democratic Party. And there are plenty of examples of that around. It may not
Jared
be at the highest
Golden.
level, but you see more and more of that. Now, whether he and Plantner in Maine is one of those people, that's to be proven. But more and more I see these candidacies emerging, and that to me is a hopeful sign. I'll tell you something. Democrats lost 90% of the counties in this country in 2024. 90%.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, that is not a prescription for being a sustained majority party in this country. It makes governing almost impossible.
Right.
You can't be simply a metropolitan party.
Um,
And so, yes, these homegrown candidates I think are very important.
and I'm thinking about Jared Golden is another
Yeah,
example.
sure. In
Right.
Maine.
In Maine, he has a completely rural, very Trumpy district. Now, I agree. And I also want to push back just
Okay.
again. I'm
It's your
sorry.
it's your well, I
I,
didn't come here to be uh,
I agree.
I didn't think the name of the podcast was the Amen Corner, so
I agree with everything you're saying, but this is not really like a pushback as much as a sort of and. We're not supposed to talk about this when we talk about Harris. Like, but I do think you cannot discount racism and misogyny because when you would talk to non-college educated women voters, that is the one that I think is where it all falls apart. They would say, we like her, but we don't know her. And I think what they meant was, they would say things like, we don't think she's up for it. We don't think she has the strength for it. And I think those were very polite ways to say that they didn't feel comfortable voting for a woman.
well, if you're asking me, is there racism and sexism in this country, I think that's self-evident. I
Right.
was involved in helping elect the first African American president, and we faced some of those barriers. But he did not run to be the first African American president. That was never central to our messaging. He spoke to people's lives in a way that people felt was authentic. He challenged the incumbent politics of both parties in the White House. He did in Washington. He did not represent those politics. And part of the problem for the vice president, I mean, look, those were burdens for her, and maybe they were decisive given the closeness of the race. I'm willing to acknowledge that. But the biggest burden for her is that she was the number 2 person
Yeah.
in the operation that folks wanted to replace.
Yeah,
And that
for
was
sure.
an insuperable barrier,
Mhm.
for her. I'm telling you that you wanna win an election, then you really need to understand fundamentally what's going on in the lives of people, and I'd like to think that, in breaking a barrier, Obama opened up possibilities for the future. I'd like to believe that we can elect a woman. Maybe we will in 2028, despite those barriers. But the person who's going to do it is the person who authentically is connected to the people they're trying to represent. And I think that she never built that relationship, and she had a very difficult burden to carry, and she probably exacerbated it by failing in any way to differentiate herself from Biden at a time when, as I said, people their vote, this wasn't a great affirmation of love for Donald Trump.
Right.
It was a no vote on the status quo, and you can't say, "Well, I would have done everything the same way," and expect to come out on top in that kind of a race.
How much do you think that Obama being a sort of singular like, I have never seen an orator like Obama.
Yeah. You have to be an incredible talent to get elected president of the United States. I was blessed to work with him. People sometimes say are kind enough to say, "Oh, well, you elected Barack Obama." I always say the same thing. You always look good driving a Maserati,
Right.
okay? Barack Obama was a great generational talent, but that doesn't mean that there aren't great generational talents out there. Nobody knew who Barack Obama was. I remember sitting
Right.
down with Dan Baltz, who was a fantastic and
From the Washington Post. Yeah.
just retired as their lead political writer, the best, the gold standard. And I remember sitting down with him and in Wisconsin during the primary in 2024 for president, and I told him I was working on this primary campaign for a guy named for a guy who he needs to watch because I think he'll be a big thing nationally, and he said, "Who is it?" And I said, "His name is Barack Obama." He said, "Barack Obama? I never heard of him." That
Yeah.
was 4 years before he became the presidential nominee.
When
So
he
really
was
what
in
you
the
need this is to all you
Illinois
aspiring
State
strategists
Senate.
out there, all you aspiring strategists out there, the moral of this story is what you really need to succeed is good taste. Keep
But
your
it's
eyes
true.
open. But,
But it's
but
true because he was an Illinois state senator then,
yes,
right?
yes, exactly. He was in the Illinois State Senate at the time, that I said that, but people need to understand, yes, his talent was enormous. It was, but his message was very much of a anti, establishment, anti-incumbent politics of Washington message, and that, and obviously having been against the war was helpful, but that was a big part of this. What you say, how you say it is really important, and this is, I guess, where we began. How you say it is not at all inconsequential. What you say is paramount, and
Yeah.
so you could be a great messenger, but if the message is wrong or inauthentic, you're not gonna win. You can have the right message, but if you don't deliver it well, then you're not gonna win. You need to have both.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that is 100% the most important issue. Thank you, thank you, thank you, David, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.